Welcome to the Media Roundtable. We're talking to leading podcasters about the shows they create, why they create them, and the impact that they have on the world. So whether you're a listener or a member of the advertising community, we want you to feel really good about the content that is out there that you can consume and also support with ad dollars. I'm your host, Dan Granger. Today, we're joined by Michael Bosstick. Michael is a serial entrepreneur and brand builder. And Michael, I'm going to use some of your words here. He is the CEO of Dear Media, a podcast network specializing in female content and hosts. He is also the founder of Bosstick Media, which is a digital agency that has helped clients sell and build brands in the D2C e-com space. And he is co-founder of JetBed Inc., a company that creates beds for corporate and private aircraft for some of the world's leading companies, and also happens to co-host a very popular podcast that we at Oxford Road sponsor from time to time on behalf of clients that we represent. It's called the Skinny Confidential, Him and Her Show, which he hosts with his megastar wife, Lauren Everett Bosstick, of the popular online brand, The Skinny Confidential. So welcome to the show, Michael. Glad to have you. We got a lot to talk about here.
Thank you for having me
with us. Yeah, for sure.
I thought I would briefly escape Lauren's shadow, but you're right. She is a megastar, and I'm happy to be introduced that way.
Yeah, good luck with that.
Yeah.
So listen, we have so much to talk about because you've kind of like, if I was to break down my understanding of your background, it's like you're wearing a few different hats. You've got the serial entrepreneur side and background. And then you've got this side where you're running a media network and podcasts, very near and dear to our hearts. And then you also co-host a show with your wife, who's a star. And so like you're sitting in a lot of different seats in this ecosystem. So like, can you just start out by at least setting the table a little bit with like, how do you spend your time between all those different ventures?
Yeah, I probably it's funny. I have the hardest time kind of describing who I am and what I do at this point, which is definitely not how you want to start off if you're, front-facing person. But basically, there's no real linear path to get to where I am now, right? If you were to read that entire bio, you'd be like, what the hell is going on here? What is this guy focused on? I started in real estate early on out of college. I'll kind of bullet point here. Started in 2008. Let me tell you, not a smart year to start in real estate. Learned a couple tough lessons along the way. Like you said, co-founded a business that actually dealt in aviation, in the aviation space, building, products for that arena. And during that time, I really got close to learning how to market products directly to the end consumer. And if you think about the aviation space, it was hard to find, who that end user was. It was mostly, the head of a company, the owner, the chief pilot. These are very targeted individuals. So how to learn how to market effectively online, which led me to building a digital agency, helping early brands online build and sell their products online. During that time, my wife, Lauren, started a blog back when they said, what the hell is a blog? Yeah. How can you make money on a blog? Called The Skinny Confidential. That started to take off. I kind of helped her get it off the ground. And along the way, people started asking, with the involvement of social channels, who's this guy that's always in the background? I was always a behind the scenes operator. What's his story? Can he contribute on the blog? Can he go on the social channels? And I always joke and say I was probably not that guy that was going to be, taking the hand holding shots on the beach, skipping along in the street wearing an outfit. I said, but you can't shut me up, apparently. So I said, why don't we start a podcast? I was a big podcast aficionado at the time, had long commutes, was listening to a bunch of different ones. And I said, that sounds fun. So in 2016, we started our show, grassroots, out of our living room, had no clue what we were doing. And kind of, found this love of audio and met so many great people and had so many great conversations that it evolved into this thing that leads me to where I am today now, which is, heading up Dear Media, female-focused podcast network, which I know we're going to talk about, and getting close to 450 episodes under our belt for our show. So I know that sounds like a kind of a crazy story, but it was this perfect convolution of all of these kind of experiences that blended together and kind of lent itself to what I do now, which is run Dear Media as CEO on a day-to-day basis.
All right. So if I did a pie chart on your schedule, is Dear Media the biggest slice?
By far, I'm not active anymore in JetBed. I shut down the agency a while ago.
Oh, wow.
In terms of the product lines that we have and that we've started, I'm maybe a board member or investor advisor in many of them, shareholder, but I'm not actively operating any of them anymore, outside of, either having a large stake or a smaller stake. But day to day, what I'm doing is running Dear Media, and then obviously hosting the podcast with my wife. And I always say that the podcast is kind of our side hustle.
Okay, so I'm going to jet tour through some of the stuff you used to work on, and then we'll get into present day. So this jet bed thing is cool. So you put beds in jets, and was that like the first successful enterprise that you were able to have any type of exit from or make any money on?
So we still have it, still family owned. It was the first thing where I got real chops as the CEO, right? And I was, before that I was doing, whether it was real estate project case by case or smaller investments or, kind of these one-off projects. This was something that I ran for close to 10 years, so during that experience, really learned how to be an operator, really learned the ins and outs of manufacturing, learned how to sell, learned how to, do some deal making, learned how to manage a team, all of that. So that's like kind of where I got my chops. And it was in a really interesting space where, as you can imagine, you meet a lot of interesting, diverse sets of people, right?
Oh yeah, and
business
so
and commercial
selling
aviation.
you're selling to the owners of the jets,
Not just the owners of private, like, so I kind of broke it down into private and commercial. And when I say commercial in this space, I mean commercial, like if, large corporations have a fleet of aircraft, you're meeting the executives, you're meeting the decision makers that are flying on those aircraft. Obviously with the private ones, I'm thinking more of the high net worth individuals that are flying these things. So you get to meet some interesting people swimming in interesting circles that are doing all sorts of different things, just because aviation's at the core of travel for a lot of these people.
hell yeah. And did you get to I wonder what that's like if you're building a business and you're not already independently wealthy and your customer base is flying private all the time. Like, how did that work out? Did you barter your way to get free travel, or did you have to like fly commercial to go to a meeting
I
and
had
they're
to fly
flying
a
private?
I had to fly a lot of commercial. I have bartered my way, as in my nature, onto one or two flights.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what it taught me was, like, I got access to a lot of decision makers and a lot of
Yeah.
big companies, and I got to see kind of how they negotiated and how they moved and how they dealt with people. And I think the lessons there were extremely valuable because it made me very confident and comfortable in kind of any setting now.
Mm-hmm.
You're seeing some of the most powerful from a business perspective people in the world at times, and so I'm super grateful for that experience.
And where did you land in terms of like market share for that business?
So to date, we're the largest. Even, the company still runs, like I said, we still have ownership in it. It's the largest, you know, bed provider for corporate and private aviation in corporate and private aviation. So it's definitely a niche, but it's a valuable niche, and it was a very fun business to operate. It didn't require a lot to do so.
All right. Well, when we get the Oxford Road jet, we're going to barter quite a
I'm gonna
bit, my friend.
I'm gonna barter my way onto it, and maybe I'll throw in a couple beds.
Let's go. Okay. Bosstick Media, which you have since shut down. It sounds like the marketing you're doing sounds like you were doing a lot of content marketing. Is that correct?
It was both. It was early days. I remember I used to be on Facebook's ad platform and turn advertisements off if they were getting a 300% return. I'm like, man, what a crap ad. Like, this, keep in mind, these were days when there were still human reviews of, when you submitted an ad. So this was early on,
I
very
think
Wild
that's
West
coming
days.
back.
Yeah, it might, at this point it might be coming back. But I remember you used to work with a rep, and obviously in the advertising business, you're trying to get the most enticing, attention grabbing ad that you can. And there's lines you push up against that in advertising, and sometimes they say yes, sometimes they say no. But at the time, you would work with a rep and say, oh, I really think this color scheme or this wording or this image would do well. Now it's all machine reviewed, and obviously much more saturated as more and more people found the effectiveness of digital advertising on platforms like Facebook and Instagram and Google. But again, because of JetBed, I was doing all sorts of experimentation on how to reach the end user, how to reach that customer. And it didn't always have to be in aviation. That could have been in wellness products, beauty products. It could have been in content plays. It was really just early days of internet advertising, as the social platforms evolved.
All right. So you weren't just promoting influencers and helping them expand their influence. You were actually working directly with brands as well and doing the whole ROI dance.
This was before
Probably
the
not
word
much else.
even Yeah, before the word influencer had even really taken
Oh,
off. this
wow.
this was back when people were saying, I think the early days where they called them bloggers, right? If you think,
Yeah.
early fashion bloggers, lifestyle bloggers. So the word influencer really hadn't even arisen. We're talking like 2011 to 2015 was towards the end of it. So those early days, 2011, 12, 13 were definitely early. I know people had been advertising online for a long time via email and all sorts of things, but Facebook, Instagram, these type of platforms
Well,
were
and
early.
I hope this doesn't sound like bragging, but like I got involved in podcasts really, really early. I think I had one in like 2010 and started pushing on trying to find a way into the industry. I was with iHeart, what was then Clear Channel, trying to get them involved in podcasts back in like 2006. And the
Mhm.
only reason that I knew that that was going to be a thing before it was a thing was because of blogs, because we were able to look at another industry and go, okay, where is everything else going? And we know that radio is like 10 to 20 years behind everybody else. So, we get to see kind of this like slow moving train and go, oh, it's going to end up over there. But the blogs were the perfect proxy. And it's fascinating to think that in your journey to what is now Dear Media, you got to learn operations and process and high net worth and all that. And then you got to move into marketing, which I have a feeling is a tremendous value to the work that you're doing at Dear Media. That's got to be a real competitive advantage.
I know firsthand what the brands want, and I'll tell you why. One, I still own and have some brands that operate in the D2C space, leverage podcasts, and I understand it from what the brand's KPIs are. Two, I've run an agency and worked directly as you have with the brands and understood what their KPIs are. And then three, because I've hosted a podcast for what, 5 or 6 years now running, I've also been the talent and worked with the brands as the spokesperson. So I get this kind of unique perspective where I've been on the side of the table for all three kind of angles when it comes to advertising. And so I have an empathy for everybody at that table, right? It's not just, hey, we got to protect the talent and let them say whatever they want, or, we just got to get the brand the best value, or the agency needs to make the most money. I want everybody to win in that equation, which is not always easy, but I maybe come at it in a way where I have that empathy to begin with. And I think it puts me in a unique position.
For sure, and also probably gives you a lot of consternation just as you're trying to navigate all the competing objectives. So let's talk Dear Media, and can you put on the timeline for us, like when did you start doing his and her on Skitty Confidential, and when did you launch Dear Media? What's the
Sure.
timeline?
So in March of 2016, my biggest fear in the world was public speaking.
Mm.
And I went on this show. It's a well-known show called the Ask Gary Vee show. I don't know if you know Gary
Yeah,
Vaynerchuk or if you've
sure,
been on.
sure, yeah.
Lauren got invited. I was a fan of his, and he said, "Hey, why don't you sit in on this show?" During that time of like 2 weeks before, my wife and I were having margaritas in Cabo, and I was like, like if you really want me to participate in the content that you're creating, like let's do the podcast.
Yeah.
Knowing we were going to go on that show, I said, okay, this is a perfect opportunity. It's already has podcast listeners. Let's have our first episode ready to go for when we go on there. We can direct people to it. And I think that clip's still up on his channel. Don't remember the exact, but you could see like I'm barely mic'd up. I'm a little nervous. I don't know. And then literally right around that time, Lauren and I launched our first episode, which is definitely up on YouTube and is horrendous. But I leave it up just to show, how something can evolve. So we launched the show, and the commitment was no matter what, it didn't matter about money. It didn't matter about like how we were feeling, that we were going to commit to a weekly episode for at least a year, rain, shine, whatever. Keep in mind, during this time, she's running her blog. I'm still running JetBed. I have the agency. I'm doing all
Are you
these things.
married at this point?
No, we got married in 2016 later, but this was 6 months before that. So we were definitely engaged. And so we started this thing, and it started as basically a Q&A. We took listener questions, or at the time blog questions from her audience. And, how do you build an online brand? What's a successful relationship? Whatever it may be. And we just answered questions that way from a him and her perspective, which we thought at the time, and keep in mind, like not as early as you, but still 2016, somewhat early in podcasting, or at least people were still saying, what the hell's a podcast? That we felt that was kind of a unique thing. What is this kind of engaged married couple? They're going to give it from two different perspectives, completely candid, unfiltered. And that's how it started in 2016. Fast forward a little bit, we didn't, since we had no background in media or audio, we joined a network. Felt the network experience wasn't necessarily as conducive to our overall brand. All the other channels, everything we were doing, with everything into account, went back to self-producing until basically the end of 2017. And in 2018, I launched Dear Media.
All right. So you went all in. And your wife, what is her involvement with Dear Media beyond specifically creating content for
So
her?
she's just, I don't want to say she's just, because obviously being my wife and being my business partner, she's tied in with me. We have a completely equal relationship in terms of all of our business ventures.
Right.
But day to day in terms of ops input, I would say she's an advisor. She's not in the day to day operations. She's not coming to meetings. She's not in that office. She doesn't interact with that team. She's typical talent on the network with obviously an ownership stake with me on the network.
All right. So in the space of about 5 years, it sounds like you launched a podcast and put yourself kind of in front of the camera or in front of the mic. You launched a network. You did this with your fiance, who you then married and have had children with since. So you've had a lot going on. And I can't imagine what the like marriage survival rate is for somebody that would go through that list of scenarios. But what did you find on that? Like, do you guys have ground rules about some things we're just not going to talk about on air? And like, how do you compartmentalize and make that work?
Yeah.
Assuming that it is working, we see it working, but only
Yeah.
you really know.
No, I mean, it's not for everyone. It's challenging. And
Yeah.
keep in mind, this is also during a time when I started Dear Media, we were living in San Diego, but I started the company in Los Angeles, and I had another company still, two companies still going in San Diego. And so it was rough there in the beginning. I don't think people realize the early days. I was signing all the shows. I was doing all the sales. I was on the phone with probably some of your reps and doing the IOs and
Yeah. Yeah.
placing the inventory and all that stuff. And then driving twice a week back and forth at night at 10 o'clock at night to LA back and forth to kind of get this done. But one of my mottos throughout the show, if you go listen to the early days, it's launch fast and adjust. Anytime that you want to do any kind of venture, it's stop waiting for perfection, get it out there, start and adjust along the way. I went back to my experiences with JetBed early days. We launched this product, we thought it was perfect. Shortly after, found out it wasn't, and really just kind of had to adjust on the fly. But I think about things like Dear Media, the podcast, JetBed. If you don't get out there and test and go and actually get market feedback, you don't know what to improve and you don't know what to work on. I think so many people wait and they do this thing where it's like ready, aim, 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 aim. They never fire,
Sure.
And so Lauren and I were committed from the beginning. Like I said, we outlined it. We said we're going to do the show no matter what we have both going on. We're going to give it a year. And I think her and I are both like, when we talk about a relationship, we talk about it in the way where so many couples are pushing two boulders up two separate hills. Like we're pushing the same boulder up the same hill. It may be with different ventures, but our goals are aligned. We spend a lot of time talking about what we actually want in life for our family. And I think if I was to give any relationship advice to couples, which I try not to do too much, is that make sure that as you take on entrepreneurial endeavors or any kind of career endeavors, that you're both on the same page. Maybe my idea is I want to go launch this huge network and run this many shows, and maybe her idea is like, hey, I want to keep a small podcast and do it from home. Like if we're not on the same page there, we can't get there. And then I think to your point, we have rules and boundaries. She's definitely more on the creative side. She is the front facing person, the rock star when it comes to the Skinny Confidential, that brand. I'm more of an ops guy. Our worlds don't really touch in that way. We don't interact with the same teams. And so while we work so closely on things, our day to day, we're completely separate.
Very cool. And if we just talk about the show for a second, it sounds like it started as an advice show. Is it still basically an audio version of an advice column from the perspective of a married couple that is known to the audience, or has it changed over the years?
So it's definitely evolved. I mean, it still is like we're peppering in advice here and there. We're still doing solo episodes here and there. We used to do it once a week. Now we do it twice a week. But as the show's grown and the audience has grown, we've had all sorts of different types of people come on the show. And maybe it started in the beginning more market and business focused, but it's definitely gone into other arenas now: sex, wellness. It's gone into financial advice at times. It's gone into all sorts of different things. But keep in mind, this is close to 450 episodes in 5 years. I tell new podcasters to start niche and start with a focus, and then over time, as your audience evolves, you can evolve as well. But I think some bad advice that new podcasters get is it's that they can start with a show about everything. We definitely didn't
Right.
start that way.
Yeah, got it. So what is the common denominator through the shows that you're doing now? Like
It,
if you're an advertiser and you think about what is this show about,
yep.
are there any through lines?
What Lauren and I, our goal every time is it has to entertain, inspire, educate. You have the audience has to leave with one of those things, right? But when we talk to advertisers now, we definitely tell them like it's a mixed bag. Like you, at this point, one day you could be advertising in a show that's completely sex focused. You know, what's a threesome? You can the next day you can have, you know, a world class entrepreneur on there talking about how to build a business. The next time you might have, you know, a world renowned psychologist talking about, you know, what does mental health look like? How do you stay focused? How do you stay sharp? It's changed. But I think, you know, we've always had a very strong focus and relationship with the audience, and we kind of see where they want us to go. We still query them and say, what are you looking for? What topics do you want to understand? And I think what people need to understand about the brand that we've built is this audience is coming to us sometimes for some comedic relief. They're coming to us for some inspiration. They want to know about niche subjects. They want to know about wellness. And we try to pepper in brand relationships that are long-term and kind of tap into that. We wouldn't have 4 wellness brands in the same episode. We might have, you know, maybe a financial service, a wellness, a beauty. So it's different buckets, but like the woman or the man that listens to our show, they're touching multiple areas. And so it works out for the advertiser.
So about a third of the time you've been doing this almost seems like we've had this pandemic and all of the fun things that have resulted from that. How have you dealt with the polarization that we see in society and like so many different relevant topics splitting people all the time? You're always going to put people off when you even talk about things or say anything, let alone take a position.
Yep.
How have you dealt with that? As a creator, but also as a network?
So this is a company where we put the creator, you know, I don't want to say first, I put the audience first, but we put the creator up there and we let the creators say and think and do what they actually say and think and feel, right? Like they, you know, we don't censor people. That was at the core of this company. Lauren and I are both very outspoken, strong, opinionated people. We're not for everybody. I 100% know that. I know there's some people that tune into that show and can't stand either of us. And I think early on, if you're going to put yourself out there on any kind of social internet platform, that you have to be okay with that. For some reason, the world's gotten to a place where everybody thinks that they need to like everybody. And that's just not how this all works. So to me, it's much more important to get to a place where you're authentically being yourself. And at least if someone, you know, listens to you, they may say, you know, I really didn't like what he said and I kind of disagreed, but at least it's not curated. At least that is like what he actually believes and who he actually is. And I think if, as a creator, if your intention is in the place where you're not trying to harm or hurt people and it's in the right place and you're just speaking your truth, your side of the street is clean, right? I think the creators that get in trouble are the ones that are kind of trying to curate and follow where, you know, the flow of whatever's going on Twitter that day is going, right? I think you get in a real dicey place there because you're not actually saying what you believe, you know, saying what you feel, being who you are. And that's really difficult to keep up with over a period of time.
Do you guys get political?
I don't know if we necessarily get like political, but we do take stances on, you know, if there's something we disagree with or an idea that, you know, we feel strongly about, like we will say it, you know. I don't like people getting political just for the sake of getting political and polarizing just to, you know, make a headline. So we tend to stay away from that. If it's something that Lauren and I feel strong about or feel that we have some kind of unique perspective or expertise to speak on, then we will. If we get asked a direct question, it's like, hey, how do you feel about this? Like, you know, we're probably going to be honest and candid about that. But, you know, there's a lot of people that, you know, deal in the realm of politics that are much more knowledgeable than us. And so we don't get in the day to day, but, you know, definitely not shy about speaking our minds.
Okay, let's focus on Dear Media. First of all, why is it called Dear Media?
So in the beginning of Dear Media, we were trying to think of names, and my frustration was with the media as a whole. And when I say media, I'm saying guys like you and me, the mainstream media, like just media as a whole. I felt that podcasting, for whatever reason, was living 10 years behind where everybody else was. And it was frustrating because I think, and I don't know how you feel, this is one of the most powerful mediums to engage with people. Like you're in someone's ear every week. They're actually listening. There's sometimes they're visual, sometimes they're not, but they're tuning in every week. But for whatever reason, there was less visibility, less marketability, less dollars, you know, you name it. It just felt like it was living in the past. And so I was like thinking, I was like, I'm going to write a letter to the media, and it's like going to be, dear media, I don't want to get too vulgar here, but basically F you, like you don't understand what's going on here.
Did you
And
write this letter, by the way? Where can I read this?
no, but maybe you and I can work
I
on
think
it.
it's time. Yeah, let's go.
I liked the logo DM. I thought it was one thing that was extremely important to Lauren and me when we were thinking about this company is it wasn't the skinny confidential him and her network. It was not, it had to be something that could live beyond us, that could be bigger than us, that was not dependent on our platform or our show, that other creators and other people could come to and say, hey, I feel confident like just being in a mission driven place. And so we wanted to make it as different as possible from the brand that we had built. And I also just kind of like the acronym DM. We were getting so many DMs about like this is how a lot of the hosts on our network get questions. They get a DM, or if I want to book a guest, I slide into the DM. We've gotten a lot of our employees in a lot of the shows by sliding into the DM. So I just liked it. I thought it was a catchy name, and it kind of started with that, intention of kind of setting the media right, which I think has started to slowly happen.
And by the way, I'm officially inviting you back when we have that letter, because I think this should be like an address, and I think this is a good venue to do that. Super cool. So tell us about, I mean, you got what, like 50 shows now? How many shows do you have?
What I'm being told is there will be close to 80 or 90 in Q1
Oh,
of next year.
okay.
It's evolved quickly, I think, for an assortment of reasons. One, if you think about this space, you're early here, early days, 2015, 16, 17, it was very
Yeah,
male dominated, right? It was
for sure.
very little female
Geeks and
representation.
gamers in comedy. Yeah, for sure.
Exactly. But Lauren and I had met so many great female hosts. We obviously were speaking to primarily females. We knew so many female focused brands. And we thought, why is there not a space that helps to even out the charts a bit, like, equal the playing field a little bit? Um, you know, and so we created Dear Media. It's very mission driven. That's why there's this emphasis on female voices and content. It's not to say men don't co-host or guest or like, there's men and women that work in this business, but the goal to amplify and kind of even out the charts is what we set out to undertake. So we've been fortunate that a lot of the talent on the network has aligned with that mission and just come to bring their shows to help push that forward. And then in addition to that, we work with a lot of talent that has like other things going on other platforms, and this is another piece of their business, and they're looking to kind of create a model where this piece is complementary to all of their other pieces. A lot of the networks that were set up before, we're kind of looking at this as its own satellite entity without taking into account any of the other platforms or businesses. And that just didn't work for some of the talent we work with. So we set up the company from the beginning to kind of tackle a lot of that. So a lot of the talent that comes here understands that model, and it helps with the inbound.
And the hierarchy of other platforms that they're also on, is it like Instagram, YouTube, TikTok,
It could be
basically?
that, it could be blogs, it could be newsletters. Some of them have
Uh-huh.
their own product-based businesses. Some of them are authors. Some of them are on television. So it's mostly just looking at the talent as an overall brand, and this being part of that brand. If you think of this, like I'll use the Skinny Confidential because I can pick on Lauren and it's easy. Of course, we have the podcast, but she's also a two-time author. The blog is still her hub. She utilizes all these social channels, and she also runs a very successful product-based business that has, beauty tools and wellness tools that, is her consumer business. And so it would be strange if we were treating the podcast as something that existed outside of that whole world.
Now, is there a benefit to the advertisers in the talent that they're associating with being on multiple platforms? Like, do you offer programs that go beyond, hey, I'm going to buy a unit in this show, where it touches their other tentacles?
Yes, and I think that's a unique differentiator for Dear Media is a
Yeah.
brand could come to us or an agency could come to us or whatever and say, we're building a campaign. Of course, we want to tap into podcasts and we want some placements there. We also maybe want some hosts, or some founder interviews. We might want a video campaign with our product featured. Oh, by the way, can you have the talent share this in their newsletter or social channel? And would there be a blog? Like we can set all of that up, which I think is a benefit to brands that are looking for that type of stuff. And then if you strip it down, we could also do the individualized program where it's like, if you just want podcast or you just wanted video, we can do that as well. And we have a vertically integrated sales and campaign team that can kind of manage that whole campaign from the bottom to the top for that agency, that brand, or whoever.
And how much of the business that you're doing is for performance marketers versus brands?
So I would say in the early days, it was a lot of performance marketers. Like, and when I say early days, it's really not that long ago, 2018, 19, working with mostly performance marketers. But I think, and maybe, I don't know what your perspective is on this, you're starting to see a lot of other brands come in that are not as necessarily focused on performance and really more focused on awareness. And that's starting to happen more and more, either through an agency or actually even direct. We've had some big name brands come to us and say, hey, we need you to build a campaign, and we understand you have all these shows, but we want it to be kind of a network spend where it's going to, get some placement across a few. And that might be different categories, maybe comedy, some wellness, some parenting, but they just want placement across, this targeted female niche.
Yeah, I see two things happening. I know we were chatting offline about this, but like on one hand, totally agree. Big brands are flooding in now with big dollars. One of the things that is slowing that up, I think, is a brand safety issue. They haven't figured out how to how to deal with that in audio. Our agency, I think, is at the forefront of offering solutions and really bespoke programs so that we can assess what their values are and make sure that we're um, keeping that consistent through the channels where they place. But it's hard work and very labor intensive. And I think a lot of the larger companies just aren't really built for that, and they don't want to take the risk right now. But it is happening for sure, and I think that's the way of the world. It's like the direct response people come and they're the first ones to sponsor a new cable channel. And then, over time, the job of the cable channel is to push out the direct response brands and bring in brands, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's kind of the same thing happening. The other thing I think, though, that may be accelerating the brand focus to an extent for a lot of the D2C brands, though, is, money's cheap. There's a lot of money in the marketplace. You look at how the stock market is performing. I think a lot of people are doing well right now. And so I think the emphasis goes to, top line growth over bottom line growth. And, at the time that we see a correction, I am forecasting that we're going to see a lot of the people that were not so concerned with performance marketing. They're going to go back to that for a while, but net, it's going to end up being like every other channel where brands are the dominant force.
I will give you, this is kind of getting granular on this subject,
Yeah.
but I think that a lot of brands are going to start to look to where audiences actually live, right? For a long time now, and again, I had an agency, and I've used these metrics too. You put money into the Facebook, Google, Instagram, YouTube machine, and you put a $5 bill in and you get a
Yeah.
$5 or $10 bill back.
Yeah.
It's going to be interesting to see what happens with this third-party tracking and cookie system getting obliterated soon. And brands are gonna that have been using those tools to boost their top line are going to have to start thinking, how do I actually communicate directly with my end customer? And there's this big talk about like content community commerce. You see it in every pitch deck. I'm sure you see it too, that brands are trying to articulate. But to me, they talk about the content community commerce, and then they actually mostly put the focus on the commerce, very little on the community, and almost none on the content. So what they're going to have to start doing is pivoting to places where there actually is content and community, and where there is a direct spoken relationship or visual relationship to their end user. And I think, podcasting, one of the best mediums for that, especially targeted places where they can do it at scale. And so I think you'll see some of those dollars dry up, as you mentioned, but they'll also shift into platforms like this.
Totally agree. And it sounds like you've baked that, which also was informed by your prior life in running an agency, into the offering to make it really a more future facing platform as a network, correct?
Yeah. I mean, I alluded earlier and joked, but also didn't joke that I would turn off advertisements if they were getting 300% ROI. I mean, I remember days when you could turn on an ad with like very little effort and work at 4, 5, 6, 700% return on your dollar. And it was big dollars back then. But again, nobody was doing it. And I saw what happened when the algorithm changed and when the big brands came in and when the metrics got turned upside down. Businesses were turned on their head overnight, mine
Yeah.
included, right? Things just immediately changed. We're going to see that again. And so what I thought back then was, okay, as this continues to evolve and happen, and as we continue to go through these cycles, better to get ahead of it than to wait for it to happen.
Yeah. Now you raised money. When did you do that? That was recent. What?
I did it in March of 2020, and I always tell my investors that if they would have waited a month longer, they would have got a much better deal.
Ah.
If
What
they listen to this, then they'll probably laugh.
a terrible time to invest in anything, right?
Right, but I'm just kidding. The deal would have been done. We, had basically negotiated everything back November, December, waited to get through the holidays and kind of got to long form before that. So we were in contract phase and all that before the pandemic. It was fortunate timing. Up until that point, we had just bootstrapped the business, took on no outside dollars. And ultimately, the reason I decided to do the raise was the company, as I mentioned, I'd started as a side hustle. I was operating two others. I hadn't necessarily taken on the reins officially of CEO. We were just kind of going along. And then I started to realize, okay, I'm not able to keep up with the demand. I'm not able to keep up with the amount of shows. I'm, behind on hires, all of these things to scale a business. And similar to you, I think I saw where the space of podcasting was going and wanted to get ahead of it. And so we did our Series A, and here we are.
And do you think you're going to keep raising money?
So we are in a good position right now where we don't necessarily need to do anything. I never want to be one of those entrepreneurs that's just raising to raise. I think that they're
round after round, where
yeah,
that's your full-time job, right?
yeah. And honestly, I hate that part of operation. Like I'm an operator at the end of the day. I like to operate businesses. I like to run teams. I like to scale companies. I'm not a fundraiser. I don't like to do that. I'm not, the best in those rooms. I don't want to get with a bunch of investors and tell them what they want to hear. I want to tell them what I want to build. And if they align with that and they're excited about it as I am, then that's a good partnership. I ran through so many of these VCs in LA and New York, and to the point where I was just like, okay, I don't like this. But if capital's needed or growth capital's needed for certain areas, and there's areas that we can exploit to grow the business faster in a smarter way, then definitely we'll be strategic about it. But I definitely don't want to get on this constant VC raise capital over and over trail.
Well, now we're getting way into the weeds on the business aspects, but I do wonder how much of an opportunity there is for somebody as enterprising as yourself to come into this space and see a media platform, not just as a way to, follow the traditional revenue model, but also to use it as an investment vehicle where you can partner for equity with other companies that are growing and leverage the inventory and the relationships that you have to create and launch brands.
Well,
are you already on that path?
I've been on that path, and that's ultimately why Dear Media was created. So I'll kind of tell you high level some of the things we've done. I never set out to build a media company. Again, I'm not a media executive by trade. I didn't understand necessarily the agency management world of talent. I joked with my, team that if I could run this business and never deal with talent, then that would be the best thing, because I wasn't a talent guy. So when we started the business, based on my commerce, an agency background, I said, we always had two legs of a three-legged stool. It felt we either had the talent in the product and no money, or the money in the product and no talent. And also we're constantly trying to figure out, which platforms, who, where, what, where do you deploy dollars? We recognize that this medium is an extremely powerful medium to connect with an audience and potentially engage in commerce. So when we raised the first round of capital, we reserved some of that capital, and this is public now. We led a round into Lauren's business of about $1 million into her commerce brand. Your Media has a stake in that business. We put about $500,000 into a sexual wellness brand called Woo More Play that we have a stake in. And since then, we've also been a strategic investor in 5 different businesses. There's a hard seltzer, there's a wellness brand, there's a couple others that there's a CBD brand. And essentially what I always explain about Dear Media is, yes, we're on the front facing, a podcast network, but we also have the ability to engage in commerce, to stand up brands, both as lead investors and operators, and also as strategics. I brought a guy named Matt Kramer over. He was early operations at Dollar Shave, and he heads up our new initiatives and basically looks for these opportunities where we can invest in commerce brands that we think would also be natural advertisers for the network. And so that kind of content community commerce, going back to that, is at the core of Dear Media. We, obviously we create the content, we engage with the community, and then when it comes to commerce, we invest in and participate operationally in businesses that we think would be natural fits for this network.
Okay, so let's go back to the network. You've got 70, 80 shows. You have 1 million shows and counting. And what are the criteria that you require for somebody to enter into or stay on your platform? Because, I feel like a lot of networks that we've seen, they kind of put shows on an up or out model where, they'll add a bunch of shows and then they'll kind of leave them they'll wait till they quit, or, and not really give them a lot of attention, or, they'll focus on the, 80-20, they'll put all their energy into the 20. Like, how do you deal with that many shows, and what's the model for support?
I think the first thing, and we start every conversation with one, do we find this talent compelling? Not just in they may come from other channels. Do we think that there's real engagement? Do we think that there's a long-term brand there? The second part of that is, if they're coming to us just to sell their ad inventory, or an agency's bringing us just for that, we're typically not the best shop, and we've passed on a lot of big name talent that just wants to sell specific ad inventory or do a show for a year and then leave. Doing my own show for so long, I understand how long it takes to build these things and how hard it is. And I want somebody from the talent perspective that's in it for the long haul. They're making this a priority to their business. It's not like, hey, podcast is the hot thing right now, I'm going to do this on the side. Because and I know that those things start and fizzle out if it's not somebody's actual focus. And then the next part of it is there something that we can evolve beyond podcasting? Is this going to go to streaming? Is this going to turn into a unique piece of IP? Is this going to get sold upstream? Is there a commerce brand that exists? Is this going on the road? We kind of look at this holistically. And because we have that focus, we'll take longer amounts of time to invest in the growth of those shows. Where if somebody was coming and saying, hey, it's a 70-30 or an 80-20 just on my ad inventory, we're not going to invest as much, because one, I don't think that there's enough there. And two, it's a lot of work to stand these things up. And I'd rather take that amount of time to stand something up that has multiple streams of income and multiple areas of value.
Oh, that's interesting. So how much of your revenue actually comes directly from advertisers on the podcast versus anything else?
So that's an interesting question now. And I actually haven't done the exercise. It used to be primarily advertising, but some of these commerce brands I'm talking about now, like, they're significant powerhouse businesses in their own right, outside of Dear Media. As we start to look at our merch business, we have, that is starting to become a pretty fruitful avenue, because we have so many shows that want to do, create their own unique merch, and we have the platform to be able to build that in. We're going to see what happens with live now, right? Like, we've all had to kind of to skip a beat on that, especially during the pandemic. And I have high ambitions to think about what a Dear Media Summit looks like. We have a very targeted network. I can see a scenario where maybe there's a weekend where a handful of shows perform over a 2-day period, and maybe some of the brands that we're invested in or have ownership in are participating. Maybe some outside brands that we've been strong partners. So I think, like, there's a lot of potential opportunity if you kind of expand the perspective and say, this could be and is more than just podcast network. Obviously, we're anchoring into audio, and we're really tapping into that medium first, because I think it drives real engagement. But what else could this be?
Yeah. So if you were just to talk to the marketing community, can you help paint a picture of the reach of the network, some of the top shows that you like to tease, and then tell us about the audience profile?
Sure. So again, one of my biggest problems when we looked at this is just from a business perspective, and again, not coming from an entertainment background, was if I was a brand looking to buy in audio, without really knowing what to do or where to go, I would have to work with someone like yourself or Oxford Road to say, where do I actually place my inventory? Who am I buying with? They're so fragmented. Right. And also, when you looked at all these networks, there was so many shows. There would be, a male political show. There'd be a sports show. There'd be a female wellness. Like, it was all fragmented where there was nothing targeted. So if I was, let's say, our brand Woo, the sexual wellness brand, I wanted to reach women, I didn't even know which network to go to do that. I'd have to kind of cherry pick shows from each of these to figure it out. So we started not only with the mission to amplify female voices, but also with a mission to empower brands to come and know that they can do targeted buys towards these Gen Z millennial audiences, female audiences at scale. And Dear Media definitely can do that. So if I was talking to a marketer and saying, hey, you need to reach that Gen Z millennial female focused audience across a wide berth of shows reaching, multiple 8 figures and listeners a month, like, we have that. We have comedy.
Let me slow that down, because you just dropped some key stats there. So 8-figure, you're saying you reach 10 million plus people a month?
Probably a little more at this point, but keep in mind, we have a lot of shows.
That's great, though. That's incredible. And then they all get to cross promote between them.
Yeah, that's the other thing, is it's from a talent perspective. I know we're getting in the weeds. If you're a talent that's trying to reach that niche audience, parking your show at somewhere like Dear Media, knowing there's visibility across the other shows, cross promotion and network visibility is also helpful, because you and I know,
Yeah.
being here early, it's not as easy to stand up individual shows as it used to be, right? Like, I do think those days are harder. And I can't tell you how many times I start a show with, I'm the next Joe Rogan, or I'm the next Caller Dad, or I'm the next Dax Shepard. I said, different time, different place, different medium. Let's get to 1,000 listeners a week first.
Yeah, completely. Okay. And then in terms of you said Gen Z millennials, but like, what are the age bands that you promote?
I'd say the primary age band is probably 22 to 36, and that's widened over the course of the network, and that's only because we've added so many shows. I think when we started out, it was closer to like maybe 25 to 33, but we have shows that are ranging from, some of them even skew a little bit older, but I would say that's kind of the profile now, 22 to 36 sweet spot, primarily females. There are some male
When you say
listeners.
primarily, give me a percentage.
I'd say at this point probably 85% female.
Oh, okay. All right. So you're diversifying. And I saw there was a dude on your roster besides you that I noticed. I don't know how he got there, but
we've worked with and I think that's the other thing to differentiate. While as a company we want to amplify female voices, we're also, like, Dr. Will Cole's a great example. He speaks to primarily women, and he said, I want to come to a network where my audience lives. And his show's doing phenomenally well and has grown since. Justin Anderson, another one that we signed in the past, he was speaking primarily to women and felt more confident placing himself on a female focused network than maybe more male dominant. But over time, Jason Tardick's another one, coming from the Bachelor world, and being engaged with Caitlin Bristow, like his audience was female. And so I think as we get further in this business, it's going to evolve. I never want to say we're only female, that men can't host or co-host, but we'll still have that mission of kind of female empowerment and amplifying female voices at the core. But that being said, as we continue to attract more listeners, we're going to offer the listeners, what they're asking for.
And I know we're getting close to running out of time here, but in terms of income, how do you index against the average?
So I would vaguely say, again, it's an 8-figure business.
In other words, higher than normal, higher than average income.
I thought you about the overall business. No, I would say like that $70,000 average household income is what we've indexed against.
Okay.
That is what we've seen. But I think that for whatever reason, and maybe this is changing, that's just how podcasting has indexed for a few years, right? Like that's the average, household income of podcast listeners has been there. But I like that this space is becoming more diverse. It's attracting more and more listeners, younger listeners, different types of listeners. And I think you're going to continue to see this space evolve. I never want to shit on radio too much, but I look at progress as once it starts happening, you can't stop it. And when I explain this to my 76-year-old dad, I say, remember when cable television went to on demand, and remember when you went to on demand, how your behavior started changing. I feel the same thing's kind of happening in audio.
Remember those comedy records you used
to
play? So what about tell me about how you grow audiences for the shows. Like, what do you do to actually proactively do that? I know part of that is about cross promotion, which is huge, but what else do you do?
So one of our frustrations for Lauren and I when we were at a different network is we really didn't get a lot of information. We didn't really, not only just what are the downloads and listens, but what are the segments people like and dislike? Where are people dropping off and where are they staying? Like, what types of guests attract the most listenership? When we go on these shows, what happens? We take a very heavy hand, a very collaborative hand at Dear Media to really get that information to the host and say, like, this is what's working, this is what's not. At the end of the day, you do what they want with that information, but at least they have it to say, okay, this is either working or not. Obviously, having network visibility across all of the different shows immediately gives a boost. If we launch a new parenting show and there's young parents on the network and they see that, maybe they came for the comedy, but now they're like, oh, I actually do want to learn how to put my kid on a sleep schedule. Like, that is very helpful. Cross promotion. We also have a very collaborative network, I think, by nature, where many of these hosts are starting to have each other on their shows, guest, collaborate together, share on social. And then, we use a lot of really strong visuals via social to cross promote as well. So that's all helpful. But again, this is still early days. I think we give our shows a much greater chance at growth and visibility, but there's still, a lot that can be done.
And when you are presenting to the advertising community, what's the elevator pitch about Dear Media and what you can bring to a brand that others can't do as effectively?
So I don't want this to sound arrogant or overconfident.
Oh, sound arrogant and overconfident.
But what I say
is tee up for that exactly.
What I say is we can do everything that all of the other kind of networks are doing and more, and we can manage and help build your campaign onto not just the podcast platforms, but to any other platform that's relevant to the campaign they're running. In addition to that, I've invested heavily in a campaign management team that sits internally at Dear Media that's going in and actually checking the spots, that's making sure that they're right, that's going back to the advertisers saying this is either working or not. What are they seeing? We're going in and creating unique campaigns that span not only in the podcast but across the channels. We're trying to offer more in addition to, right? We're saying, okay, yes, of course we can do the podcast, but like, does it make sense to implement some YouTube? Do you want to create some social clips? Like, what else can we do? And the biggest thing is that we're targeted and at scale. Meaning, if somebody is trying to reach the audience that we reach, they can have maybe the same product could have maybe 3 different types of reads and conversations, but against the same niche. Maybe if they're on a comedy show or a wellness show and a parenting show, it's 3 different types of reads from 3 different types of hosts, but still targeted. And we've seen a lot of success with brand founder interviews where they come on and they're guesting on 3 or 4 shows, but it's 3 or 4 different conversations from 3 or 4 different perspectives that really create a full picture story of what that brand has going on.
Love it. And final question is around purpose. And if you could define what like real world impact, what do you want to see different in people's lives as a result of the work that you're doing with Dear Media? What is it?
I want people to listen more. I think we've gotten to a place, like one of our slogans is shut up and listen, right? And that goes for me as well. I think we've gotten to a place where there's these knee-jerk reactions. You have to respond to every single thing that you see. It's usually something that's upsetting. And it's mostly because we've stopped listening to each other. One thing that we've championed at Dear Media is that we have so many different conversations on the podcast. And, even if you make it granular to what Lauren and I have done, we have people on the show all the time that we may disagree with, that have completely different backgrounds, that have completely different perspectives. And that doesn't mean that conversation should be shut down or we shouldn't take the time to understand it. I find that when you take the time to listen and understand people, you develop more empathy, which makes you a nicer person and puts more kindness out in the world. I know that sounds kind of cheesy, but if we could get back to a place where more people are actually listening to each other and understanding why people think the way they do, I really can't believe that the country actually is so divided and believes that 50% of the other people are enemies. Like, there's a reason we all come to these understandings, whether you're left or right or whatever. It's the values you grow up with, the circumstances you're brought up within, that you have these unique perspectives. And if we took the time to understand why people came to the decisions that they come to, or the perspectives or opinions that they come to, I think it would leave a lot more room for improvement, empathy, understanding, kindness. And I think podcast is a great medium to do that.
Well, you're in good company. We had one of our early guests this year was a guy named Frank Sesno, who was a White House bureau chief for CNN for like 20 years. And he said, too many exclamation marks, not enough question marks. Mm-hmm. Right. And I think that's what you're describing. And, one of the things I've found just being involved in this podcast that we're doing is that I think there is a movement toward what you're talking about, toward empathy, toward suspending judgment, and not just taking the low-hanging fruit of calling people out or shaming people to get attention. And I'm really grateful for the work you're doing, and that your whole team is doing, that you're in the marketplace doing that. I hope this is an opportunity, not just for us to do more business, but for a lot of people to find out about the opportunity that you've created for people. Very, very impressive stuff. And I hope the conversation continues.
Well, listen, thank you so much. The admiration is completely mutual. What you've done is incredible in your space. And so, yeah, I think like we're in a unique time here where I think with the rise of this medium and kind of people taking a little step back to simmer down a little bit with the holidays, like hopefully we're getting to a better place. But I think it all starts with listening.
This show is dedicated to advancing our mission of mobilizing marketers to promote truth and civility in journalism. We value clarity, truth, fairness, respect, de-escalation, and tolerance. And we invite you to engage with us at MediaRoundtable.com. Now, if you found the show helpful and you're committed to our cause, please follow us on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen. It's always free. And if you're a marketer looking for an agency to help you balance your brand values with your business objectives, reach out to our agency, Oxford Road, by going to oxfordroad.com. Subscribe to our weekly newsletter, The Influencer. Special thanks to Bianca, Kyle, Jennifer, and the team at Podcast One. And as always, influence responsibly.